Today's video is going to be about interest groups and bureaucracies. This video and the next day's lesson will be very helpful in writing your Environmental Protection Agency's essay. Interest groups interact with the bureaucracy in what we call an iron triangle. This is kind of an old view, but it's still potentially a powerful one. We start with the Congressional Committee. They're in charge of writing the specific laws that will be given to the bureaucratic agencies to enforce. Interest groups are going to try to work with members of the Congressional Committee, who will then write laws for the bureaucracy to write policies that benefit all of them. So the Congressional Committee writes the laws. Interest groups are affected by those laws or are interested in that law, and the bureaucracy carry them out. The Iron Triangle is the idea that there is a three-way alliance amongst the legislatures, bureaucrats, and interest groups to make policies that benefit all of their interests. So the hope is that by working together, everybody wins. Now this could potentially be a positive thing, but as we'll see, it could also be negative. This is also an old view, because as we'll see, there are now so many interest groups and they are competing that perhaps this is no longer a triangle. That being said, this is still a widely held view of how governments work, and so it's important that you understand the concept of an iron triangle. Iron triangles in action. This all revolves around policy. Remember, policies are laws that are put into action. Congressional committees write the laws. Interest groups are affected by the laws, and bureaucratic agencies enforce the laws. Now we're going to look at interest groups here. Interest groups will provide electoral support, money, lobby, and research to congressional committees. This is all stuff we've learned about what interest groups do. In return, congressional committees write friendly legislation that the interest groups like. This information and lobbying support is also then given to bureaucratic agency, who in return tries to not regulate them as much potentially or give them special favors. Then we get policy choices and execution, which affects committees and how their laws are being enforced. And in return, they provide funding and political support to agencies that they like. Now, for example, we could look at big tobacco. Now here's an example of this in action. You don't necessarily need to write down this slide. That being said, it's important that you be able to understand how iron triangles work. We'll look at another example tomorrow in class. So here we have the House and Senate Agricultural Subcommittees. They write laws about tobacco. So tobacco farmers have an interest in making sure that cigarettes remain legal so that they can sell their tobacco for lots of money. The Department of Agriculture is in charge of enforcing any law that the House and Senate write. Now here, the House and Senate Agricultural Subcommittees, they may receive money from the tobacco farmers for election campaigns. And so they might write laws that keep tobacco legal and make it easy to continue to sell tobacco. The Department of Agriculture, in charge of the legislation, has to do what they are told. But they could also take valuable information from tobacco farmers to make sure that they're executing the laws effectively and making sure that tobacco farmers don't lose any jobs. This becomes an iron triangle, and it makes it very hard to get rid of tobacco because these three are working together to keep it going. They keep jobs, they get money, everybody's happy. Except perhaps doctors who have to take care of tons of people dying of cancer, and of course the families that have to pay for it. So, the idea here is that everyone in the triangle has a similar interest. The legislators get funding from interest groups and make laws a reality with the help of the bureaucracy. Interest groups give that information and money to legislators to get their way, and that almost always provides them big financial benefits. And then the bureau chiefs and department heads who implement the policies and interest group goals, they get their money for the department because they're keeping legislators happy. And of course, then we get this cycle where perhaps they're not doing the right thing, but they're never going to be able to stop it. They're considered iron because they're strong. This is oftentimes a bond that's hard to be broken by the president or the congressman on that committee. Sometimes they're referred to as little sub-governments. The idea is that everyone else is left out of their decision-making and that all the real work gets done in the super refined details that these groups work out together. And unless you're an expert and understand what's going on, you may not even know that this is happening. And in the end, this could maintain interests that are not publicly popular. For example, we still don't have gun control laws. The NRA works closely with the Committees on Justice, and they work closely with the Justice Department, and so far, we've gotten no movement. Now, an issue network suggests that iron triangles are in fact too simple. And because we have interest groups now on both sides, this makes it more complex. So the issue network would be a complex group that includes the media that debates an issue and slows down policy making. And that an iron triangle is too simple because there's going to be two sides to every issue, pulling that triangle into little pieces and making things messy. What we see is that on really big, important issues, an issue network is probably going to be what's happening. But for little nitty-gritty and very technical issues, iron triangles still win. Now, a president can try to appoint a strong agency head who can steer the policy, but in the end, the president can't control the media. Interest groups are going to be competing for attention, and so things are always going to be messy. The last slide here is the concept of the revolving door. This is another relationship between interest groups and people who work for the government. Now, government officials in the bureaucracy could quit their jobs, or if they're in Congress they don't get reelected, could then take government jobs for lobbying agencies. The fear is that private interests can basically buy off government officials to get their job done. Now, this could recreate the iron triangle, because an idea might be that an official does a favor today in return for a job later. So maybe someone who's supposed to inspect a big mining company's factory is not doing a very good job inspecting it because their hope is that in the future they're going to get a job at that mining company making millions of dollars, so they lay off of them right now. That could be very bad and involve our laws not getting properly enforced because people want to get rich. So that's just something to think about. It's another way that interest groups can try to influence the government. And it's certainly corrupt. The problem is they're not taking a bribe right now. And unless we can catch them on tape making a promise to them about a job, there's nothing we can really do if they quit their government job and later go and work for one of the companies that they were supposed to be regulating. The fact is that this is common practice. Not only that, we see that people who work for interest groups end up coming in and getting hired to work for bureaucracies. For example, we have a president of Bank of America who later went on to go and work for the very regulatory agency in the government who's supposed to regulate Bank of America. And people begin to wonder, is he really going to do a good job regulating a bank that he used to be in charge of and probably still has ties to? So sometimes things kind of stink of corruption. All right, that's all for now. Have a good evening. There are no questions. Make sure you bring in these notes.